Hey, hi, hello, welcome to episode 78 of Trail Society, produced by Free Trail, brought to you by our friends over at The Feed. I'm Corinne Malcolm.
I'm Keely Henninger.
And I'm Hillary Allen.
And okay, we kind of blitzed by this in episode 77 because we were all completely just like hung over from race weekend stuff and just like mentally maybe not as aware as we could have been. We glossed over the fact that Keely is married. And so I just wanted to check in on that post-marital bliss.
Oh my gosh, it's so fun, like having a wedding and getting to see all your friends meet all of your other friends and your family. I think that's like the most special part is like having cousins meet friends. But yeah, the bliss is real. I was definitely a marriage skeptic for a while until I met Jay, and then he really wanted to get married and have a wedding. And I was like, all right, fine. And 10 out of 10 would do it again, even though it's like kind of stressful planning your own. Definitely worth it. And yeah, it's super fun. I feel like the high like kind of extends well beyond it because you just like keep reflecting on it, which is really fun. Like, I hope you don't come down from it. I hope you just keep remembering the good times and like keep it at like that nice, like positive state and not view it as like, oh, now it's sad because I don't get to see everybody. Which I feel like I have post races sometimes. So yeah, it was super, super fun. We had like the perfect weather. We got to do so many different activities with so many different cohorts of the people who came. So like a lot of random people got to meet other people during certain things. And yeah, it rained once, but it was like 2 p.m. on wedding day and the wedding wasn't until 6:30. So we got super lucky and it was really, really fun and definitely hard to leave to go to States. But I'd say I told JT this, or JT knows I wouldn't have left for anybody else except for Rach. So if Rach wasn't calling me to pace, I don't think I'd have made it to States.
I totally understand that. I guess the real question is do you have an operational bathroom at home in Portland now?
No.
No.
Still no shower, but we got a toilet and everything still, so we're all good. It's like I go to my gym and I'm being a much better athlete because of it, because I have to go drive to my gym every day almost, and I just do way more warm up and cool down and like more PT. And so I think it's honestly a net positive. And lately we've had a crazy heat wave, which Corinne, you've been dealing with too, but we have no AC and we're a top floor of a house. So it's been freaking brutal. So like the driving to my gym into the AC once a day is not too bad of a reprieve. So I can't
That's
complain,
so
but
funny.
hopefully in the next couple of weeks. But I almost like laugh when I say that because I feel like that's all I've been saying for the last like couple months.
I know. I feel like this is like episode 6 of No Shower Operational, which is a lot. It's like 3 months of no shower.
Just
No,
don't want to talk about
I feel
it.
like maybe I've shared this on here, but I'm pretty sure my gym thinks I live in the parking lot because like when I'm doing like sauna training, it's like they see me every day and I come in the same outfit every day and I'm there for an hour and it's like maybe I warm up again because I like it's not post workout and then it's like I sauna, shower and leave in the
Yep.
same clothes again. So I'm pretty sure
Yep.
they think I live in the parking lot in a van, but
I've had this experience and I'm van
actually living
lifing
in a
it.
van.
Yeah.
Yeah. And then Hillary, you're over in the land of Wales where it is, I think, torrential rain right now. What's going on in Wales while you're there?
Yeah. So what initially brought me over here was because I'm staying in Europe between Labrador and UTMB. So I was approached by the directors of this. It's called the Love Trails Festival. It's one of the original like music and trail running festivals in the UK, and this year they're having it in Wales. So I kind of use it as an excuse. I'm exploring actually the Ultra Trail Snowdonia course. It's been a bit, had some good weather. It's been a bit rainy now, but that's okay. And it's actually quite serendipitous. Like the Airbnb hosts that I have, they actually were the creators of what was originally their race. That's now the Ultra Trail Snowdonia race in the 80s. So it's been really fun to talk to them. They're also big cyclists, so that's cool. But yeah, I'm going to be joined by some Americans. Billy Yang
Hillary,
and
yeah. Other
Hillary Yang are
Hillary.
gonna what?
I said other Hillary.
Yeah, other Hillary. She's gonna be over there at this trail festival. Lucy Bartholomew is gonna be there. Ryan Sands is gonna be there. A whole bunch of other people, like athletes, coaches, that I don't know from that are local to the UK community. But it's a pretty big trail running festival. There's races. One of the races there is in the Golden Trail Running Series. So yeah, it should be a pretty cool weekend, and maybe it's just going to be a slip and slide in the rain, but that'll be fun too.
I think it's going to be really fun. I don't want to say I'm jealous, but I think it sounds like a really cool trip, cool opportunity. So
Yeah,
we'll stay tuned.
and I think well, they're looking into it to come over and do some festivals in the USA. So I would
Sick.
keep an eye out for it. But yeah,
What's that? A women's panel at a trail fest in the USA? We could probably figure something out. We've got some friends that would probably
I
help
am
with
on a
that too.
panel there too, but I know it's like a mix, but still, I think that would be really good. I know Hillary, the other Hillary is doing a talk on like women and the importance of like highlighting women's stories in trail running. So that'll be a cool one that I don't want to miss. And I'm
Yeah.
giving a talk too, so should be fun.
Sweet. And then I am getting ready to crew the Rainier Infinity Loop for my husband Stephen and one of his friends. So what that means, segue here, is that I will be needing and they will be needing all of the snacks. We've officially, our snack drawer overfloweth with snacks from our title sponsor, who we've really loved working with, the folks over at the feed. Without them, this wouldn't be possible. And so, yeah, snack drawer overfloweth. We've gotten everything lined up for game day, which by game day, I mean a probably 50-ish to 60-ish hour effort as they go up and over Rainier and run the Wonderland Trail in two different directions. So thank you to the people at the feed. If you also want snacks from the feed to fuel whatever your adventure might be, a jog around your neighborhood or a multi-day FKT effort, you're going to go over to www.thefeed.com/Trail Society. And there you can get $20 credit every quarter to use towards more snacks. I've got some of the picky oatmeal, the beet chocolate one. It's really, really tasty. That was, I feel like, a Keely recommendation, but I'm wondering, Stephen actively just ate our last waffle right now, so we're gonna have to re-up that very fast. So I'm wondering what you guys have coming or recently arrived from the feed in your snack drawers.
Well, yeah, and I think I was like overly excited like last time about like, oh man, I'm in Europe, like the feed's gonna, be like present or launch in Europe. So that is a TBD. It's hopefully to happen, but still, as of now, I'm about to place a feed order, and even though I'm in Europe, it's still not a problem. I still can order from the US warehouse, and they ship currently to basically anywhere in Europe, anywhere other than Spain. Sorry that the laws there are a little bit tricky, but yeah, so I know I've got to like make a list because of, some of the big training blocks that's going to happen here. But on my list, I mean, I have to have the waffles, but I'm a really like I love those. I'm a really big fan of the fresh, like the cookies. It's like kind of like a
Are
real
they
food
fresh if
thing.
they have to get shipped to Europe?
What?
I said, are they fresh? Yeah.
I mean, technically, because they're in like the sealed fiddle package, but I don't know.
They used to be really close to home for you, given that they were shipped from like down the street, basically.
Exactly.
So
I
they're
know I could
very
just like
fresh.
knock on the door and be like, "Hey, you guys making these today?"
Keely, given
Yeah,
that you
it's a
have no
big
shower, what are you eating?
Well, it's a big Wonderland month because me and some friends are doing Wonderland at the end of the month that you might help with too. So I just ordered a bunch of stuff to kind of have as the first couple nights where we're kind of fast packing solo. And I got this Alpine Start like instant coffee
It's
because
super good.
yeah, I've heard it's really good. I haven't tried it. I'm really stoked to try it. I really want to pack my jet boil and stuff, but like we'll see if we want to run with that or if we just want to be one jet boil family and not all of us have our own stuff. So I think having really easy coffee and not like bringing a little like pour over setup would be probably the smart move. So I got that and then just a bunch of like bars that are pretty high in calories. So I got a couple Joji bars, which are mostly carbs. I got some Bonk Breaker protein ones, like kind of just did a whole gamut of them because I want some diversity. And I know out there, if you're out there for 3 days, it's just, you'll probably crave different stuff.
Yeah, agreed. Yeah, I'm hopeful that everything aligns and I get to join you guys for parts of it. But yeah, so again, www.thefeed.com/Trail Society. Go get that credit. It's really sick. Don't use anyone else's either. You just use our credit. Okay. This is my plug. Shame all
And
the
get
other
a water
podcasts.
bottle and get a water bottle because the water
Come to
bottles
our
are so
team.
cute.
Yeah. Team Trail Society for forever. Okay. We got to dive into some results. We are recording this ahead of Hard Rock. So who knows what's going to happen? We're very excited. The field is amazing. Dale's picks included bringing in the likes of Cami Bruas and Katharina Hartmuth, for example. Katharina was second at UTMB last year. Both phenomenal athletes. They've both been over there for a little while. So excited to see more international women line up at a race like Hard Rock. Obviously, the women's field is very small there. The women's, like the field in general. Obviously, there's not a great deal of diversity, but this is one of the first years in which the field is definitely impacted by Dale having to do even picks, men and women. And the women that got picked to come in are just like some heavy hitters. Tara Dower is also in the field. Like I'm really excited. Obviously, it's the Courtney DeWalter show, but I think that there's going to be a real freaking race there, and I'm excited to actually watch it play out.
Mm-hmm.
So there's that.
Have you ever gone?
I've crewed and paced Megan Hicks before. So I've been out there for that, helping I run far out and then crewing and pacing part of it. I'd love to go back out there again. But the side story of that is that a lot of the races that have been happening recently have been on the very short side of the sport. You guys should check out the Sub Hub because they do previews and post-race interviews with a lot of these athletes. But races that happened recently included the U.S. Vertical Running Champs at Loon Mountain, where Lauren Gregory, who I have to remind everyone was in the 5K final at Olympic track trials as well.
Oh, cool.
Like she made the final. I think she was the last person to make the final. So she lined up there. She's the only woman in split shorts in that race as well. I was like stoked to see that. But yeah, won the Loon Mountain race just ahead of Rachel Tomasic and Amber Zimmerman. Amber had a very small baby strapped to her on the podium, which is very cool. So I'm excited to learn more about Amber. Men's side, Joe Gray wins his 25th U.S. title.
Nasty.
Which is stupid. Like so insanely talented for such a long period of time. So really cool to see Joe Gray come out on top, just ahead of Tyler McCandless and Jonathan Aziz in second and third. So some really like solid heavy hitters kind of in beyond in the up and coming phase of sub ultra stuff. They're really
and I think it was Tyler McCandless's first time representing USA now. Like this will be his first team ever. Which is crazy. Like he's been in the sport for so long. I feel like he's been more into trail lately, but like started in roads, and he's just such a gifted runner that to me, it shocked me that this was his first Team USA, but so cool that he made it happen kind of later in his career too.
Yeah. So cool to see the talent coming in there. Other short race, the world's hardest 5K, I'm pretty sure at Mount Marathon took place as well over 4th of July. David Norris wins his 5th title there and set a new course record in order to overcome Max King and Jesse McAuley, who's Canadian, I believe. So they like the Alaskans didn't count David as like the top Alaskan because he lives in Steamboat now, but he was like born and raised in Alaska. But it's his 5th time winning there, set a new course record. It was like just over 40 minutes, something stupid fast. And beating Max King on that terrain is always impressive. He's been doing well in the Cirque series. David has, and I'm excited to see that kind of continue. And then on the women's side, Claire Rhodes, it was her sixth time running the race. And I think she had never finished higher than 4th before this year. She wins it, 4th fastest time ever, just like beating Kendall Kramer, who's a Nordic skier, at least it was at the U of U. She's made the US team for international Nordic skiing trips, finished second. I want to say it was like only 20 or 30 seconds back from Claire. And then Meg and Okuma was 3rd. And I think 10 women went under 60 minutes, which I don't think has happened there before, which is a really big deal. Fighting for the women in the top 10 there. I believe all 10 of them went under 60 minutes, under the hour mark, which is pretty massive. So super cool to see Mount Marathon go off again this year over 4th of July. I've never been to it. I've been to Seward, and it's like such a wildly cool looking experience. So add it to your bucket list, maybe. Let's go to Seward. The sun won't set. It'll be really fun. Before we hit record, Keely was talking about how she had an athlete who was actually at Valderon, and it was struck by bad luck again this year. The 100-mile race was cut to, I believe, 68 miles due to really adverse weather, but American Allison Baca technically took the win there over the shortened course by 45 minutes over Sylvia and Mai Tamori. It's like just a bummer that 2 years in a row they've had big issues. Keely, you had an athlete in the 100K who it seems like had an epic but very hard experience there.
Yeah, she was doing it almost as she didn't know if she'd get into CCC. So she signed up for Valderon kind of as her backup 100K. She ended up getting into CCC. So then we treated this as her like practice 100K. But otherwise, yeah, she went into it wanting to learn a lot, and she got dealt so many different things to troubleshoot. And yeah, at one point, because the weather was so bad, they got stuck at an aid station, basically told to wait out the weather for 3 hours in really cold temps. And so, yeah, she said it was like one of the hardest things she's had to do was to like sit for that long and then have to start running again. And yeah, I felt for her, but also I was really proud of her for finishing. She ended up getting a place into UTMB 2025 from it. And I told her that hopefully it is way harder than CCC will be. And that will feel a little bit more manageable than Valderon was.
Yeah, I had an athlete in the 100-miler. And he said it got actually stopped after 50K, but
I wonder if it was just like people, I mean, the winning times were like maybe 14 hours. So I think the people probably just got stopped at different places on course is my guess.
Right. And I know that the 100K started like Friday morning, and then the 100-miler started, in the evening. But he said it was like horrific conditions of like running, just like sideways wind, like just it was scary. Is like what he used. So yeah, it was pretty intense. So it was just bad luck because it's the second year in a row. I know that last year it was stopped up like even sooner. So
yeah,
people didn't even get to finish. So
yeah, the front of the race was officially terminated, I think, a little bit further along the course because the men's winning time was like 12 something, and Allison Baca, who's very, very solid, I think her winning time was like 13:45 maybe. So it's like they were definitely, I'm assuming, that kind of 68-mile mark in. But yeah, last year was like 17 miles, and the 100K got stopped before the final downhill for the women. Effectively, I think one or two women were able to run the full distance. Maybe part of the top 10 men were able to run the full distance, but then a lot of people like Steph Howe, for example, was stuck. They stopped the race at the previous aid station for everyone else behind them, but then like gave them the finish from it.
Dang.
Yeah. Not good luck.
So crazy. Not good luck at all. And I know that it's easy to point fingers at different race orgs who've maybe not made the call in a timely fashion in the past, but it would be so hard to know, when to make that call because like you probably think it's going to pass or maybe it's not so bad. And I'm glad that they did make what seems like pretty smart calls in relation to this race.
Yeah. I mean, the runner safety has to be first and foremost. And it's just like we've had deaths at races. There's a recent death, actually, I think another race in Spain. So it's like very important that like there's rockfall and like a number of athletes were injured and one gentleman did succumb to injuries, not at Valderon, but at a different race. So it's just like, yeah, you got to think of runner safety at all times. And it's also, making sure that you have your mandatory kit because you're going to be stuck in really bad conditions potentially. So bring it all, bring that space blanket. Two final results that I wanted to highlight from very different parts of North America. Quebec Mega Trail just happened over the weekend. It was the 8th stop on the World Trail Majors. The 100-mile there was the premier event for the World Trail Majors, and course records were set on the men's side and women's side. Anne Champagne and Jean Francis won the races in 24, 28, and 1901, respectively. I had a bunch of friends that were out there to run the 50K. Seems like it was a very fun event. They had a 50K, a 100K, and a 100-mile race. And seems like it was very well received from what I've gathered. And then Silver Rush 50 mile obviously is like very different. I think it might have been on a slightly different course than usual. I think it was a full out and back this year, but I wanted to highlight this because Mary Denholm's name had come up at Canyons because she ran an amazing first 60K there. Was in the conversation that whole time. She won the women's race here at Silver Rush 50 mile in 7:04, which is blazing fast. David Roach took the men's win in 6:18. You got to remember that race is basically entirely above 10,000 feet. And I think Mosquito Pass is what, like 13 something? So like that's very, very fast. So I'm like keeping my eyes on Mary Denholm because I think that she is going to be a person in conversations when it comes to fast 50 miles and fast 100Ks, et cetera, moving forward. She's a running coach. She's based in like the Denver Boulder area.
She runs with Steph Flippin a lot.
Yeah. So excited to keep an eye on Mary's progression because she seems like a speedy road gal coming over. I think her marathon PR is well under 2:40. Like she's run maybe like a 2:36 or something. I think she qualified for the last round of Olympic trials in the marathon. So yeah, bring it on. Bring more speed to the trails. I'm very excited for it.
So fun.
Sick. Okay. We have to dive into, we're doing some nerdy science stuff today. And I think that it should be fun for everyone and hopefully prompt a lot of questions from our listeners. We're kind of doing a deep dive back into some more recent research that's come out this spring into the menstrual cycle again and kind of its impacts in and around training and racing. And Keely, I'm wondering what we're talking earlier this week about, like, what do we want to talk about? What has been interesting to people recently? And you mentioned this. I'm wondering where what prompted you to dive back into the current state of menstruation research?
I've been getting a lot of questions from both my own athletes and people on Instagram and other forms of social media that I don't know around different parts of their menstrual cycle and just questions in general about hormones. And so I was like, what is the current state right now? What is some of the fun stuff that's come out lately? How can we address some of this? Like, for instance, I was getting some questions around something as simple to me as someone asking me why they might have low estrogen when they're on a hormonal birth control pill. Like, why is my estrogen showing low? Like, isn't that bad for bone health? And, reminding them that they're getting estrogen in a different form through the pill that is allowing them to continue to build the bone health is something that like I had to remind them of. And I think there's just a lot of questions around this. And so I kind of just wanted to talk through a little bit of the current research around menstruation in relation to performance, because I think that we've talked about this before. And if you go on Google Scholar and you search for menstruation and performance in female athletes just from 2024, there are so many new studies, which is super exciting and showing that there's a lot of funding and interest in this region that we haven't been able to talk about before, right? And so, yeah, and because it's prevalent, right? Like so many athletes.
That's the question, right? Like how prevalent is it, right? Like taking a step back, like how... Like, I think we all sit here and we're like, oh, like I have a normal cycle or I've had a normal cycle, but I feel like that's probably very privileged because I feel like that's not normal. So like how prevalent is our menstrual related issues?
Yeah. So I'd say based off the studies, a lot of them are showing around 80% of athletes experience different menstrual related symptoms. And obviously, there are more symptoms typically associated with athletes who are having a natural menstrual cycle compared to someone who's on birth control. Because remind you, you could still have a menstrual cycle when on birth control. And so typically those athletes who are naturally menstruating, having more symptoms. And typically a lot of people feel these symptoms, right? Like they don't love having symptoms. A lot of these symptoms make you feel kind of crummy around getting your cycle. You might have bad thoughts about your body. Corinne, you always talk about like, there's always one part of the month where you're like, I hate myself. And I totally feel that too. And, anywhere from, depending on the sport, 40 to 80% of female athletes are on some type of hormonal contraceptive, which changes these symptoms and also changes how, the body might act in response to different stimulus. So I just thought like, because this does impact so many athletes in various ways, obviously, those naturally menstruating, those who don't, and those who are on birth control, it'd be cool to kind of dive into this kind of research and some of the progress we've made over the years.
Yeah. Before we do that, I just a quick question for the room, for all of us here is just like, we're all coaches. We're all working with athletes actively. Is this a conversation that you intentionally or regularly have with your athletes? How do you broach it with athletes? Is it them coming to you? Is it an automatic question? Maybe Hillary, if you want to kick us off there, like how is this showing up in your coaching practice?
Yeah, so it's honestly kind of setting the stage initially, like on an athlete call, with women that I coach of like, okay, like this is part of it. So, it kind of just like breaks the ice there. And
what do you ask?
Oh, basically just like tracking their menstrual cycle. There's like a series of questions too of like that in a pre-coaching questionnaire that I send to them asking like if they're on hormonal birth control, if it's like normal. And this is obviously for like, athletes of a certain age, right? Not every woman that I coach is, actively menstruating, but this is something that we talk about, and like those different questions are kind of on there to kind of break the ice. And then that's something we go over on an initial call saying, okay, like we don't have to talk about this on every call that we have, but it's something that, I would like you to track. And then, telling me, and we can like putting it even in there on their schedule of like when they have their period. And if they don't have it, then it's also something we're tracking with their doctor and blood tests and things like this. So it's something I address like pretty early on.
I think that intro questionnaire, if you're utilizing one, is a great way to do that. And mine, it doesn't matter if they're men, women, et cetera, they all get the same questionnaire. And so it's like, if applicable, because I want that question to be open-ended to everyone, because obviously like not everyone who identifies as a woman menstruates. et cetera, and so on. And so it'll say like, if applicable, like,
Yeah,
you know, like,
exactly.
do you have a normal cycle? If applicable, like, are you on hormonal birth control? Like, kind of like some tell me more type of things. And then, yeah, that first call, it's like, okay, like, just like checking the boxes here, seeing what feels normal, seeing where things might be missing. Keely, do
And
you have
it's
a
not
general?
always
Oh, sorry.
normal for everyone to be like super comfy talking about it. I see if
Mhm.
that's why I put it in writing. So then like it's there, the information is there, and then it's always like a point of reference to kind of go back to as well. Yeah.
Yeah. We're normalizing talking about it effectively. Like
Totally.
that's the goal. And I think it is becoming more normal, but you're right, for a long time it's like, it was kind of like black box, don't talk about it. And I'm wondering, Keely, like how that is showing up in your coaching practice as well.
Yeah, I also have it in my initial questionnaire, but I just make a point to also discuss it on the call we have initially too, and almost gauge how they feel about talking about it. And then if they feel super open, great. You know, I get a lot of texts from athletes saying like, cycle came on the exact day it came last month, like celebration, you know, this is amazing. And I get other athletes who maybe don't share it as regularly with me, but then, you know, maybe a couple months in, as they're feeling more comfortable, all of a sudden they might text me and say, hey, my cycle's like a couple days late. Like, should I be worried, or is this normal? And I think just like as you build that trust, you can start to get a little more nuanced and have the discussion around, you know, regularity. And if it is inconsistent, or if it's getting more inconsistent, that could be a little bit of a red flag. And yeah, I try to just open up that discussion early and get a better sense for how comfortable they are, and then kind of run with that, and hope that those who aren't comfortable at first will hopefully get a little more comfortable as the time goes on. And then, yeah, to your points, some of my athletes are in the perimenopause years and have a lot of different symptoms and are very confused with their bodies and their irregular menstrual cycles. And so we really pay attention to that and try to take notes in our training app, and also like outside of the training app, of how they're feeling on runs, how their menstrual cycle is, and if they have aura rings or anything like that, we kind of track it along there too, just to see the kind of trends that they're having, and seeing if we can, you know, mitigate any of the symptoms by changing their training or their expectations for a couple days a month or so.
Yeah. The perimenopause phase is particularly hard, where it's like,
Tough.
we're going to be opportunistic. Like, you feel good today, you're doing a workout. You don't feel good today, we're keeping it easy. Kind of diving into this next kind of like point of interest, Keely. For the longest time, there has been research done in this space, well, kind of, but it's not been done well historically. And so, and you've seen that from the inside, actually, like working in your previous job at Nike, like what you guys were trying to implement there versus what was happening elsewhere, how complicated it truly can be at times, like inter-subject and inter like group data, and how that can change so dramatically within the women that you're studying. Like, what has changed, or what is being implemented now in study design that is hopefully putting us in a better place to actually understand what's happening?
Yeah. So for those of you who don't know, traditionally studies have used the calendar-based method to track cycles. So they would just ask the participants to monitor their cycle based off when the cycle starts and when the cycle ends, cycle being start of bleed, end of bleed, and then start of next bleed. You know, as we've learned more about the menstrual cycle, kind of to Corinne's point, we know that not everyone's cycle falls on a very normal trajectory, and not everyone's follicular phase, which is the phase from basically menstruation through ovulation, it's not always a certain amount of days. And ovulation does not always happen on day, you know, 16 or whatever you want to say. And just like the luteal phase is not always an exact amount of days. And so we've learned that over time. And so slowly labs are able to, with funding and time, be able to implement more thorough testing measures to at least know where women are in their cycle in a better sense than they did in the past. I still think there's a long way to go, which you guys, that's not shocking to you guys, but right now, most studies, and this is based off of a big women's symposium that was at ACSM in 2022, are using a minimum of an ovulation kit. Sorry, ACSM 2023. And so an ovulation kit will be administered basically post-menstruation phase end. So after your last day of bleeding, typically you'll start this a couple days later, where you're testing your body for the peak that is associated with ovulation. And basically by doing that, you're going to pee on this little stick every day. When you get a positive amount, that means you're most likely ovulating. And they're using that to kind of at least define that midpoint. in your cycle so that they can decide like, okay, before that we had slow rise in estrogen during the follicular phase. After that, we have high progesterone and estrogen for the luteal phase. Based off a lot of studies looking at individual results, I still think it'd be cool to get just more blood tests during the actual cycle to see, how do those estrogen progesterone levels change for each individual, because we know that that's not as straightforward as we think. But I do think this is a really good step in the right direction. And one of the studies that actually triggered this kind of idea in my mind was done on some rugby players. And it was done by a team led by E. Smith. And it looked at the minimal influence of the menstrual cycle of hormonal contraceptives on performance. And it was published recently in 2024. And this study actually did the ovulation kit, and they got them to come into the lab 3 times throughout the study and get full blood panels. So they actually had some extra data to go alongside this ovulation kit. Again, I don't think 3 data points is the best, but again, it's a step in the right direction.
It's way more than normal.
Totally. And the other thing that's been published recently with how best to study women, especially when looking at menstrual cycle, is using training camps where you're actually monitoring these women's training, having them in a similar location. They're doing the same training. You can ideally monitor energy intake through, different logs and providing them the food. And then obviously get access to them very regularly. So you could get, daily blood draws if you got the funds to do so. So all of these things being slowly implemented is really, really cool. I would love more funds to come into this space so that, you could do a training camp type of study where you're getting these ovulation kit tests and you're getting, every other day blood draws or something like that, where you're actually plotting out these numbers for all of the athletes. And then you're actually defining the luteal phase and follicular phase for each one. But we're not quite there yet. But again, progress is progress. I don't have my athletes go super in detail in terms of tracking. If they have the ring, I do like them to kind of like follow that and make sure like it's giving them the right trends of like body temperature when they start their cycle, all of that kind of stuff. But I was wondering like what you guys do for tracking, and how you kind of determine different phases for your athletes, if you do that at all.
Yeah, and I would say that I think that we are not in a place where you can be like, ooh, during your follicular phase, do X, and during your luteal phase, do Y. I think it's what the studies have historically shown, or more kind of like the consensus statements, which are going to continue to evolve, have been like, an Olympic medal has been won during every day of a cycle, basically. So it's like, yes, there are performance detriments. Yes, there are days where you feel better or worse, but it's really about tracking those individual symptoms. And so it's like, I know that during the 72 hours pre-bleed, I feel X amount away. My heart rate's a little bit higher. I can see that in my training data. I can see that in my sensations. On day 1, I have more GI distress, et cetera. So it's like, I think tracking like the positive and negative symptoms and saying, okay, like if this is a consistent trend, and I know that your heart rate is elevated, et cetera, and and you're emotionally not in a great place, because emotions are important in the 72-hour window before you're approximately going to get your next cycle. Like, why would we load that with like super intense or high, like something that's gonna be like, you're gonna hate yourself because you didn't hit X, Y, or Z thing, or your long run felt bad or whatever. And then you start to bleed and you're like, oh, no wonder I felt so horrible. This happens every month. So it's like, I'm not saying, oh, here you're ovulating, here you're doing this, here you're doing Y. It's more like, if those trends are consistent over time, utilizing that to inform, yes, going ahead with something, or no, or just like, or if they're in a race situation, right? Like we know that, okay, like they feel really good on day 2 or day 3, sick. If we know we're going to hit day 1, maybe it's like, okay, we need a plan B for nutrition, just in case you end up with the GI distress that you oftentimes get, or, whatever that might be. So that's how I'm utilizing that information, as opposed to being like making big training recommendations based on cycle without like, I think you need really detailed information. So you're utilizing athletes' sensations instead.
Totally. Yeah, I think it's like, RPE is a big metric that I train off of, like for my athletes. And it's kind of getting that into, okay, like a lot of it might not be super scientific, but I know some studies that we've talked about on this podcast before, we're talking about that was kind of some of the problems with some of the data surrounded by women in cycles. Is like a lot of it is just very like subjective, the data points. But still that actually matters, like how you feel and how well recovered you feel if you have actually symptoms or not. So it's kind of leaning into that. So yeah, I mean, I have my athletes kind of track. I mean, maybe it is like a little bit more archaic, like the calendar method, but still. But then on the day-to-day basis, we're always talking about, our PE and also going by sensations outside of that, outside of the physical workout itself. So then you notice trends over time.
And I mean, our athletes are very much influenced by their mental status, right? And so to Corinne's point, if they're not feeling good every single month for these 3 days, then it just giving them the grace to take those days easy, I've found gives them more motivation to go out on those days. Even it's just like acknowledging that it's okay to feel crummy sometimes goes a long way, which is pretty cool.
And I mean, you see that. So I've got an athlete who's recovering from like an upper respiratory tract infection right now. And it's like, I talked to her on the phone. And I was like, man, I can hear it still. Like, and so I was like, hey, I know that I gave you your first workout back post race. Like if you feel like this is making you cough, if you feel like if you're wheezing, if you feel any of these sensations, I want you to do an easy run. I don't want you to push the intensity. Same thing, like having that flexibility mindset. If I know that the estimated date of their next cycle is, July 18th. Let's say we've marked it in Training Peaks, and maybe it's going to be 24 hours later or earlier, whatever, then it's cool. We add like a little flex note for those days before, if that's when they're most symptomatic, right? Or the day of, if that's when they're most symptomatic. And so it's like just knowing that you have the ability to pivot, akin to the perimenopausal women who it's like every day is an opportunistic situation. I think being able to start implementing that now around a quote unquote regular cycle, I think allows us as women or people who menstruate to continue to adapt forward as we enter the next chapter of that hormonal relationship that is going to be ever changing. So it's not perfect. It's definitely, you're like, this is a soft science right now. But I do think, right, the things that work for recovery for athletes are the things that make them feel better. They might not like actually change your like creatine kinase levels, but if they make you feel better, there's a positive impact on performance. If we can make you feel better about having a flex day, that's going to make you feel better about where you are at in your training cycle.
But I'd like to push back on that. I don't think it's like a feel good science. Like I do think that the things that people do feel, especially because like we're humans, like, cognition and able to like articulate how we feel, it's because there is something chemical happening. Like that is the whole thing of neuroscience and things like that. They are measurable things. Just maybe we just don't have quite the tools. Like we're not like having a blood panel on us 24/7 to actually figure out what the highs and lows of the hormones are actually reading out. But I do think that the feelings that we're reporting or the things that we say is a real reflection on the hormone levels that are in our bodies.
Maybe. Yeah, no, I agree. I think one of the studies we're going to touch on in a little bit is interesting though in that context, in the sense that I think there is a lot going on with the menstrual cycle, but I think sometimes maybe it's there's more weight behind the mental side than the actual physiological side in relation to performance. But not discrediting the mental side, because there's sometimes I wake up too and I'm like, well, I'm just screwed today. I feel like crap. Can't run. Like,
and it's like, cool, you're going to go out for 30 minutes. And if it feels good, you're going to continue. And if it doesn't feel good, you're going to go home. Like, I think that's very valid and very valuable. And it's like, those are very real sensations, even if it doesn't completely align with 100%. A blood panel or whatever.
Totally.
So, I feel you. Okay.
Such a fun space.
So I guess kind of moving forward from that kind of training camp mentality, or like how we're utilizing that, how we're applying that in the field with our athletes or ourselves. For example, for those who have regular cycles, we've all experienced various impacts of that. Like I have said here very publicly, there's like 72 hours every month where I have to convince myself I have not gotten fat overnight, which is like maybe too blunt to say, but it's like, that's the sensation I have. And it's like, I have to remind myself that I look the same as I did yesterday, even if I don't feel that, and it'll be better in a couple days, that game. But it's like, there are some newer studies that have come out that highlight kind of some of these implications or symptoms or experiences felt in and around different phases of the menstrual cycle. And I'm wondering what some of those studies are and what they found in those studies.
Yeah. So I chose 3 studies to kind of talk on. One is going through like sleep and the mental health. One's going to go through like sensory response and reaction times. And then the other one's kind of related to injury and strength. performance as a whole is really tricky. Obviously, measuring performance is tough. None of the studies that have been out recently or in the past have any sort of conclusive like response to performance as a whole. There's not really one way or the other where it's like follicular phase is better performance, et cetera, et cetera. So we're going to go a little more niche and just look at these 3 parameters for now. And then, maybe in another year will go by and we have a little bit more insight into performance on the like VO2 max or lactate threshold kind of level. So the first study was by Kuikman et al. In the Journal of Science and Medicine and Sport. They're out of Germany. And they looked into sleep and mental health. And the one downside I do want to point out about this study, and again, this one was published in 2024, was that they use the calendar-based method still. So there is a caveat here where we don't know 100% that each person was in the correct phase. However, I think that it still is a decent study and it lends some light into how I think we're all going to resonate with how we feel during our cycle as well.
Yeah.
So overwhelmingly, sleep was perceived to be impaired during the luteal phase of the cycle. That kind of checks out. It's how I feel. We're hotter when we're sleeping. I have night sweats some of the times. Like, it's just not that fun. So that one doesn't shock me, calendar method or not, right? The other thing that's kind of sad in this study was that they looked at the relationship between high anxiety and depression scores and symptoms. And they did find a correlation between high anxiety and depression scores with more symptoms. So those who experienced more symptoms related to their menstrual cycle were more likely to report higher scores on the anxiety depression scale. And again, because it's the calendar method, I don't think we can say this is definitive, but I do feel that way as well. I have a lot more mood swings during the times a month where maybe I have a lot more symptoms, where my hormones are maybe raging a little harder than other ones. So I think, again, my opinion, this is all kind of fun because it's just putting into context what we all feel. And then the last thing that they were looking at was basically like how their sleep was related to these scores as well. And they found that lower sleep quality scores was also correlated to these higher anxiety, higher depression scores, which we have seen that in other studies as well. When we're looking at like residents or workers who work night shift, those scores actually have been correlated in the past as well. Do you guys find that sleep's messed up for you guys?
I think that makes a lot of sense. Or like you can see where it makes sense, right? Yeah. Like when my metabolic rate's gone up and my body temp is high during that phase, yeah, sleeping can be a little bit harder and my sleep routine becomes even more important. And I can definitely tell where I'm at, like those higher anxiety, higher depressive quality phases of
more
the month
melties
as well. More melties per se. And it's not just because I'm hangry, but maybe they're related. But I do think that it's like you feel like you're more tightly wound, maybe. Like you're like, I don't have the capacity to maybe like take in these sensations because things are changing rapidly. I think that's like sometimes those like hormonal shifts that are happening is like the instability that we're experiencing. Hillary, what were you thinking during that?
A little bit inappropriate, but I think I have like higher anxiety when I'm sleeping and I don't sleep as well when I'm on my period because I just don't want to wake up in the morning, have blood on my sheets and have to do laundry.
Like, that's fair.
I'm a 35-year-old woman and this still happens. So, it's still anxiety provoking, especially if I'm traveling in a like new place.
You're like, sorry, Airbnb hosts.
Yeah, I remember one time I was like gathering a lot of materials. Like sometimes my cycle's just super like high flow and JT's like, looks like you're going to war. I'm like, I'm getting ready for a war overnight.
You're like, don't question my methodology.
Definitely happens. I noticed that with like higher training volume. That would be interesting too with athletes if like you have a higher training cycle, because I know sometimes if my cycle like shifts, then I have it like a week later and then it can be like heavier. So it'd be interesting to know. But yeah, that's definitely really stressful.
Yeah. So who knows why those stressors are happening? But there is like actually when we study depression, for example, right? It's like, is the depression causing you not to sleep or is the not sleeping causing your depression? It's kind of like this very vicious circle of like they don't help each other out, right?
Or
like,
the circular thoughts, because the symptom of depression is how much you ruminate on certain like thoughts and like the fact of just asking it in a survey can actually prompt the symptoms of depression. So I don't love surveys when they like report that for a data point. Like I get it, you have to do it, but I don't love that from like the neuroscience perspective because it's almost like it's a confirmation bias. So
Yeah, I don't know what specific surveys they used for scores here. I would have to go look at that, but it's like
they were solid.
Yeah, and so it's like one of those things too, right? Where it's like oftentimes the indices that tell us like if someone's got a risk of an eating disorder, the survey isn't like, do you have an eating disorder?
Well,
so it's like generally they try to ask the question without asking the question.
Totally. I get that. But it can be, well, I guess too with that, with like surveys and stuff, it's like depends on the age. Like if it's like an adult, but I think that can be more dangerous when it comes to kids and people who maybe aren't as self-aware. But I'm sure if it's like, people of a certain age, it's less of an issue, but
yeah, it's still super fascinating. It feels, it's confirmation bias that we're like, yes, this is how I perceive this. But I do think that it's like once again, it's nice to know that you're not alone. And it's very validating to be like, this is a common experience that we all share.
Yeah. And they use the depression, anxiety, stress scales, the DAS-21, which is pretty common to use to measure depression, anxiety, and stress. Again, I don't know if there's a separate one for children. I would assume there is, but yeah. Anyways, in this one, it was a 21 question survey.
Tell us about the next one, because you've got 3. That was study 1.
Yeah,
tell us about the next
one. I think 2 and 3 I'll lump together just for brevity, because I think they're kind of related. But I think, as we grow up, we're told that women tear their ACL more, right? We've all heard that. And I think that there's a lot of research in ACL tears for women because that has been something that's more predominantly female than male. But I think people have had all sorts of guesses as to why. It's like, is it the joint laxity? Is it the Q angle of the hip? Is it the different times a month? All of these things. And I think up until recently, we never really tested too much around the timing of the month. We have some studies that show that, but we've had couple studies come out recently looking into not only injury and strength changes during the menstrual cycle, but the one that's been the most interesting to me to read was around the actual cognitive fluctuation throughout the menstrual cycle in relation to anticipatory and spatial cognition function, which could be reaction time, right? And especially if you're thinking of a soccer game, reaction time and ability to anticipate when something's happening would be pretty crucial to potentially navigating some sort of injury on the field when it relates to proper movement. And so they looked into this in a group of people. This was a team of researchers led by Ronca et al. In the Journal of Neuropsychologia. And they actually found that there was a faster reaction time in the athletes and fewer errors performed during the menstruation phase. And then during the luteal phase, they actually had poorer anticipatory skill. So they were unable to anticipate the stimuli. And then they had a slower reaction time. And then during the ovulatory phase, they had more errors. So I think that's a lot of nuance, but in a nutshell, it basically is showing that during that luteal phase and the ovulatory phase, people are less likely to anticipate these stimuli, potentially have slower reaction times to them, and make more errors. And so I think that this is kind of interesting because, especially in our sport, we do a lot of anticipating, right? We're running a lot on trails and having to adjust our foot and adjust to different rocks and put our foot in different placements. And so I think if we can have this data, and as more studies come out, makes it more concrete, just knowing that when you're going out for a trail run might be kind of helpful. Because
it's that clumsy factor, right?
Yeah,
Keely is an epic faller. And actually my old roommate, Olivia Amber, there'd be a certain phase where she'd be like, I can't run downhill fast during this because it's I can't process the trail coming at me. She's like, I feel like I'm in a cloud. And that is once again, our confirmation bias of I've experienced this, but I totally can see where this happens in running and in ball sports, etc.
Yeah. But I think that seeing this be in the luteal phase makes sense to me. However, the really interesting part about this study, and I think, again, I'm biased, I thought this was the most interesting part, was that those who had more symptoms during menstruation thought that their performance was way worse during menstruation than during the luteal phase at all of these tasks, when in fact it was better. And so I think this is kind of a testament to the mental side of the menstrual cycle, is that it is really hard to have the menstrual cycle. It gives us all sorts of symptoms, right? We don't feel good. We're bloated. We can't sleep super well. But it is showing that even though those symptoms are happening, potentially they're not negatively impacting their responses to these stimuli. Again, it's not everything, but in this particular study, their reaction time and everything were not impaired during this phase, even though they felt like they were. So I think that's just something to bear in mind as coaches, right? Where I think giving women the flexibility to take it easy or go hard is really great, because we're not forcing them to do something when they feel like crap, but allowing them to maybe go out and do something. And maybe if they surprise themselves and feel better, they actually keep doing the run and get it finished, when maybe, you know, otherwise they wouldn't.
Interesting.
Yeah, I think maybe that's also psychologically, maybe like we're maybe have been fed for so long, like, oh, you're actually bleeding. Like some people do have a lot of symptoms, right?
Totally.
Like cramps and all this other stuff. So, and I haven't, I'm maybe very fortunate, to not have those as much. Like sometimes I do, but it's not all the time. It's not, but I know something like my sister would just get annihilated by them. But, you know, I think we've been fed this narrative for so long, like, oh, it's like bad, take it easy. So I think there's almost that psychological block of like, of course, if I'm on my period, I'm going to be performing poorly, when it's cool that the data is showing maybe not.
Yeah. Versus like, right, like, yeah, that narrative of like, I've talked to a lot of people about this now, in which it's like, we're like, oh, we actually feel worse during this other time period. And actually, like, as soon as I'm through like the first 24 hours of bleeding, I actually like can feel really good. I've raced a ton while bleeding. But it's just like day one is my issue because I just have GI stuff. So it's like, it's interesting, yeah, what narrative you take to it, right? Because you're right, we have been fed for a long time, like, oh, performance decreases when you're actively menstruating, and it's like maybe yes, but maybe very much no for a lot of folks. So it's very obviously individual, but there's like a huge cognitive side to this.
Just like thinking like Keely, like go into war.
Yeah,
Like,
Yeah,
getting ready for
reach.
battle. I love it.
Yeah, totally.
Yikes.
Yeah,
Yeah,
I
and
think
then
ACL. Oh, sorry. I was gonna say my
ahead.
last thing about ACLs is I think that they're probably akin to many things multifactorial. And one of the things too, beyond Q angle and joint laxity and fluctuations with hormones, definitely, like we've seen that with pregnancy and postpartum, right? Like that joint laxity that continues on, et cetera. But it's also like women are historically very quad dominant and not very hamstring dominant, versus like men are generally less quad dominant. And so that's part of the rationale. But for the first time ever, they're like designing soccer cleats specifically for women to try to avoid these ACL tears from these like sharp changes in movement. So it's like part of it's probably like physiology and musculoskeletal structure, et cetera. But part of it might be that we've just been like in shit equipment this entire time. And it's like if we actually adjust the equipment to meet like the needs of female athletes, that all of a sudden maybe that ACL risk goes way down in ball sports, et cetera.
But also, like, isn't it total like muscular skeletal volume, right? Like men have more of it in general, not like
there is some of that too, but they've like there's been a bunch of alpine ski studies, for example, looking at ACL tears because they're really good at tearing those puppies. And there was a guy at Montana State when I was there who was working with the US ski team on this, and quad dominance versus hamstring strength was a big factor in alpine ski ACL tears in female skiers. So we're just naturally very quad dominant individuals as opposed to having like robust hamstring strength. But yeah, so different sports probably have different factors as to why ACL tears happen. But yeah, at least on the alpine skiing side, they found like a big issue with quad to hamstring strength ratios. Continue, Keely. Sorry, tangent.
Yeah, speaking of strength, the last study decided to look into different strength training protocols and how they impacted the athlete in different phases. And basically, as a little bit of a reminder, estrogen is pretty good for muscle building in a nutshell. I'm not going to go into the details. That's in a previous episode. Progesterone, not as good for muscle building. And so when they started looking into this, they looked at different kinds of muscle strength. And basically they found that during the late follicular phase, so this is, nearing ovulatory phase, it is a better time for isometric strength. And then when you're getting into that ovulatory phase, it's better for isokinetic strength. And then they found that early follicular, which would be a time where your hormones are very low, they found that it was more unoptimal for strength training. And again, this is a study of one. I think it will take a lot more studies to kind of get more nuanced here. But one of the things that I've been thinking about as I just go through all this research is that I still think we're in the phase where the answer is how you feel on the day is going to determine what you do. And so I think for me, I do feel a lot better late follicular into ovulatory, especially going to the gym and doing strength training. So that is when I feel like I'm a rock star. For some people, that might not be the case. But I think this study is a good step in the right direction to start getting nuanced into training and seeing like, hey, maybe this is a better kind of time for an isometric training load versus isokinetic for strength training, because your body just will respond better to it and your estrogen is high.
I like it. I can't speak much to it besides the fact that there are definitely times where I'm like, I'm amazing. And there are times where I'm like, oh, sorry, Pete's loud ears are shaking off behind me. There are times where I'm like, yeah, I'm amazing. I'm quick. I feel punchy. I feel snappy. Like I feel strong. And there are times where I'm like, yeah, I feel off or I feel different. And it's like, I could probably relate that to phases, but just haven't historically because I'm not in the gym. Most of us are like moving our bodies, let's say 6 days a week. And so we have more data points for how we feel on the bike, how we feel running, how we feel skiing, as opposed to like most runners, for example, might be in the gym 2 days a week or maybe 3 days a week. And so maybe you don't have that direct translation, as many data points over time to like feel that sensation. But I believe it. Let's put it that way. I'm a believer. Hillary, have you noticed this in the gym or noticed this with working with athletes, like having that sensation or not?
You know, I notice it running more, not necessarily in the gym. But yeah, and like most, because I'm not, I mean, like I spend a lot of time in the gym, but I'm not a strength coach. So like the things that I kind of prescribe to my athletes are like pretty basic or just like injury prevention stuff, or I'm kind of like outsourcing that to a PT themselves. But yeah, I guess I just notice all these things just running more, not necessarily like in the gym itself. Gym it's more of my kind of like supplementary.
You get it done in the gym, independent of what day of the month it is. And we feel it maybe more on that day-to-day running. Keely, anything you want to add there before we pivot to another equally important topic and something that we've been getting a lot of questions about?
I just wanted to clarify isokinetic versus isometric. So obviously like ovulatory versus late follicular, they're very close in proximity to one another in the cycle. But isometric would be like you're holding resistance, right? So it's like, for instance, like you're holding a plank. You're just like stationary. Isokinetic is your more traditional movement. So you could be like on the leg press or something, but it's typically like isolating a certain joint movement, but you're pushing through the full range instead of holding stationary. Just kind of in case people didn't understand what those were.
Yeah, vocab. We'll have to add this to our long vocab list of Trail 101 encyclopedia topics. Okay, so the other question.
Next topic is more important.
Yeah. So something we wanted to touch on today, because we have been getting, I think, a lot of questions about it. We've touched on it throughout our 78 episodes of existence, I think, pretty consistently. But it's this idea, like I've been experiencing this. I've actually, my next call after this is a consult with someone who's kind of like in that OTS, overtraining syndrome, potentially phase. But this idea that, once I'd meet with them, it actually turns out that 90% of the time, they're probably like an LEA, low energy availability, or long-term low energy availability, falling into that like relative energy deficiency in sport or REDS phase. But independent of that, we're left with very similar questions. And those are, i.e., how do we recover from LEA, and or can I still run with LEA? And I think we're getting this question quite frequently, independently as coaches, as podcast hosts of this platform. And so, Keely, I'm wondering if we can kick off with, how do we recover? Can we still run? What does this even mean or look like?
Yeah, I think the short answer is that we still are learning, right? I work with Dr. Krause on a couple of athletes where we worked kind of together to determine what their training load should be coming off of low bone density and low energy availability for long term. And we're still kind of figuring out the exact protocol, but I think based off some of the recent studies coming out, the longer answer is that typically you can keep training most of the time, not always, but it's normally a reduced training load to decrease loading on the bones, combined with increased calorie consumption, both during running and outside of running. And this kind of is in line with studies where they showed that, just increasing calorie consumption and or reducing training load with the increased calorie consumption does bring back menstruation and start to decrease like the symptoms around low energy availability. However, I think this is highly individualized as well, where like if you have been in a state of LEA for a really long time and you have a lot of really bad symptoms, it might require you to just do the increase in calorie consumption and cut training, right? Like that very well could be the answer to that problem. So I think it really depends on symptoms and length of time in LEA and like how your blood tests are showing and then how you respond to the interventions. Maybe, you start off with your coach cutting your volume a little bit and increasing calorie consumption, but maybe, you go a month doing that and you still don't feel any better. That might mean you should probably cut training for a while to see if just increasing calories can help. And then if that doesn't help, I think that's, cause for working with your doctor to see what else is going on. But yeah, I think
further.
That's kind of my go-to right now is reducing training load, trying to keep the bone loading to a minimum so we don't cause a bone stress injury, especially if an athlete comes to me presenting with osteopenia or osteoporosis, and then increasing calorie consumption both in and outside of exercise has been working for the couple of athletes that we've been kind of progressing.
Yeah, and I've been consulting with Dr. Kraus on a couple athletes as well, and it's like, man, this is the consult of the century. But here's the thing too, it's like then that's probably that tipping point between LEA and REDS, right? Is like low energy availability is a state, and I feel like, or is like an active state, and then it's like once you've been there for long enough, you kind of end up in this REDS destination where it's like you're very symptomatic, you are amenorrheic, you have a bone stress injury, for like all those things are starting to add up in a big way versus like there's even been some studies that have come out recently that we're like maybe just going to touch on very, very briefly, but this idea that like even short periods of LEA, we're talking 3 days, 5 days, etc., one even like inter-day LEA, having like a really big training day, for example, and just still being very under fueled, can have longer term impacts on health. And so it's like there's this active moment and then there's this like almost like this passive, you're just at the final destination of this thing and you've really got to kind of course correct in order to regain bone health, et cetera, and so on.
Yeah.
Not an easy place to be.
No, definitely not an easy place to be. I think the short-term LEA is really interesting, showing that it can have those negative impacts on bone absorption just right away. I'm really interested to see how, this is the carbohydrate nerd in me, but like how just short-term decreases in carbohydrate ingestion during runs. So like very short-term LEA might impact these parameters too, because I think we see a lot of that in our sport where, yeah, you might meet caloric demands outside of the run, but maybe, you're not meeting them at all inside the run. So like, what does that look like from a hormonal perspective?
Yeah. I think there is some indicators there of that being an issue. And they've even said like, is REDS or OTS really just like chronic under carb fueling, for example? Yes. And like protein is still very important for men and women and as endurance athletes. Fat is still a part of that equation, but there does seem to be like a bunch of hormonal consequences for having long-term or even short-term under fueling specifically with carbs.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. Last year.
Bodies.
Isn't it like spikes in cortisol too in the blood, which is just completely mitigated by glucose? So I mean that's carbohydrates. So it's like the micro spikes that you see throughout even the day, and then even like throughout a run. That's just like the common like labeled stress hormone. But yeah, that can be, it's easily offset with food.
Yeah, and a couple of studies that are obviously like not gonna define everything, but they show that if you do eat during the run, it will mitigate that stress response drastically compared to even if you refuel right away after the run. So I think there's a lot of evidence there. It just hasn't been studied as much, but that was kind of the trending theme at ACSM last year was carbohydrate availability in relation to LEA and RED-S. And I think that will start getting some more funding here coming up, which is cool.
Yeah. So can we just, I guess, briefly touch on like what we still don't really know? Like we know some of these things to be true, but in this space of research, like what still don't we understand? What are we gambling with or guessing on and just like hoping that we're kind of heading in the right direction?
Yeah. I mean, I think this is the space that intrigues me the most. But I think one thing for certain we do not know is how to impact bone density in athletes who've been in LEA or RED-S for a really long time. We've seen a reversal in some of the bone parameters, but not actual bone density in like these 6-month studies. So it's like, does that reverse itself in a year, in 2 years, in 3 years? Like, I don't think we know. And then, level of osteoporosis, like was the athlete in the early stages of osteopenia or are they actually osteoporotic? That might determine how it can be reversed as well and how old they are, right? Like there's so many things in that kind of equation around bone density. And then, yeah, I guess my biggest question is like, does this reversal hold? Like if you bring an athlete back from chronic LEA or red S to a point where they're able to train at a reasonable load, they are menstruating in a regular fashion. If they can menstruate, they have good symptoms, they aren't always fatigued, and they're not getting bone stress injuries. Are they in the clear, or are there still some like weird hormonal things going on in their body because they were in that state for so long? Like, I don't know if we know like how that impacts down term and if that has any sort of relationship to, response to starvation in the future. Like if they have one day where they're underfueled, does their body almost like revert in an extreme sense? Like, I just feel like there's all these things we don't know about how it regulates things later. And that's something that intrigues me. Like, I have a big hypothesis that it's related to autoimmune disease. And so I feel like all of this just requires more research in this state and looking at athletes over a really long term.
Yeah, we've touched on that.
We do know.
Oh,
sorry. But just like concretely, like bone health. Bone health is the one thing we cannot get back. Like, so
we are seeing some changes.
We don't know that exactly for young athletes. Yeah.
Like anecdotally, like I know individuals who have had horrible bone density due to long-term caloric restriction who are gaining bone health back. And they're over 30, which is also an important part. Like they're not an 18-year-old, they're not a 21-year-old.
I guess I'm talking about like in those, like if you don't do it at a certain stage. Like, I mean, yeah, my mother was like osteopenic, right?
Oh, yeah.
You can offset that to a certain degree, but you can't get all of it back, is my point. You can
maintain. Yeah.
So anecdotally, we do know some athletes who are generally would be termed past the point of like continuing to build bone health, but their Z scores are no longer -3. Like they're trending back towards normal, which is, I think, very important and very cool. But you do have to get very creative with like, because running itself, like running more than 10 minutes is not bone building. You're talking about like estrogen supplementation and kind of hormone replacement therapy.
That's what I was just gonna say.
You're talking about caloric intake. So it's like you're not going to get it back just by eating. You're not going to get it back by just doing one thing. It's like really taking a team approach with a health. Like if you are a negative, -3 Z score, like you probably got to be working, and you've been amenorrheic for a long time. Like you probably need to bring in a good, well-rounded team to get you back on track. But there is hope. You're not going to be lone. Like you can repair some of it to a degree. To what degree, we don't know exactly, but we're seeing it anecdotally with a few case studies, essentially taking athletes that are in their 20s and 30s who have had long-term caloric restriction and putting them on estrogen replacement therapy and like effectively, gradually rebuilding that bone health that they lost because they were in a state of chronic caloric restriction in their teen years and their early 20s, et cetera. So you're not a lost cause, I think is what we're trying to say. It's not as it used to be.
I wasn't trying to say that.
It used to be really grim though, like historically, right? Like the science used to say like, oh, sorry, you're out of luck. Yeah.
No, not completely. It's just, it is, my point was saying that it's important to pay attention to, because like you just said, to a certain degree, you can't get it all back. But like, obviously we don't know yet, but still like,
just don't put yourself in that position. Just if you are over the edge right now, come back quickly. Let's bring you back now. Or, not to say that we want to fear monger, but it's like, this is a reason to not get into this place potentially.
The reason to fuel.
It's a reason to fuel. And speaking of fueling, we're going to Society Slam. And to do that, we got to talk about Snicky Snacks and the folks over at The Feed, our favorite one-stop shop for all of your snacking needs. I'm like getting kind of hungry. It's now 12:15 here locally. And I'm like, I need snacks. I need lunch. I want to go run eventually. And so I am dreaming about my snacks that are all upstairs right now, including my post-run protein shake that I'm really excited to eat. We've been eat, whatever. If you make it really thick, you could definitely eat it. But yeah, we've got some momentous protein in our house right now. And I've been really loving making smoothies with it. I don't know if anyone has snacking needs that they would like to share before we slam it up.
I'm just putting a list together of what I'm going to be ordering in France.
We're making you hungry. That's what's happening.
Yeah, exactly.
Keely, anything you want to add before we jump into the first one?
No, I just think that, when I get feed orders, I always buy extra that go in my car as like backup snacks, so that if I forget to pack my post-run smoothie, I have at least like a protein bar in the car. Like always have center console snacks in your car as a trail runner, because you just never know when you're going to need them.
Yeah. Could not agree more. I'm going to, I guess, kick us off. And this was kind of something that we touched on last time, but we didn't answer this person's question. So and we did supply one bra recommendation last episode, but if this is actually a very peculiar, interesting question. So I'm going to start with this one. So listening to the latest podcast, I think you all are so great. Thank you. This is just us like singing praise from other people. The sports bra issue really is something that interests me and would love advice or suggestions, as I am petite but have implants and rather large ones. For the life of me, I cannot find a bra that works. It's either too tight if I go by my band size or no support if I go by my cup size. Please send help from the little lady that loves to run with 32E bra size. So yeah, I think that, like, honestly, there are probably athletes who don't have implants who still feel the same way, right? You got a big rib cage and maybe a small cup size, for example. It's like, how do you meet those demands? So if this resonates with you, if you have this experience, slide into our DMs, give the little lady some help when it comes to finding a bra that works for her. We're talking small band, large cup size, any recommendations out there, we would love to pass them along.
Yeah, okay. We have a treat for you all too. Coming up, we'll have someone on who's very much an expert in some of these sports bra things. So stay tuned.
Yeah, I'm really excited about that interview. Okay, Keely, take the next one.
Okay. Hi, ladies. Longtime listener here. First time reaching out. Big fan of the pod. After listening to Corinne tell us that big dogs got to eat for 70 plus episodes, I will say that's a Rachel Drake-ism. So
it is a Rachel Drake-ism.
The credit where it's due, which is actually from her brother. So the Drake household, thank you.
We should make shirts that look like the Lou shirts from Western states with the big, I think that's the font we want to use.
That's a good idea. So anyways, this person said, I think it's finally starting to sink in. My ultimate running goal this year was to dial my race run nutrition. Not only did I finish my fastest UTA 50, that's Ultra Trail Australia, in May, but if getting in enough calories can log big miles and get on with the rest of my day. That's huge. It's nice to be a normal person. I honestly thought it was normal to be absolutely shattered and bound to the couch for the remainder of the day after every long run, regardless of the intensity. Now I know that's not the case. Thank you, team.
Big dogs got to eat.
Big dogs got to eat.
Merch pending always.
One day we'll make it a reality, maybe.
One day. It turns out merch is so complicated, you guys. But if you have any other ideas of things that you want to see on merch, let us know. But I do think the Lou Crew font for Big Dogs Gotta Eat would be pretty sick.
It would be really cool.
We'll talk to the Drake household. Okay. Hillary, take this next one.
Hey all, huge fan of the podcast and so appreciate everything you do to elevate women in sports. You all are probably 85% of the reason I've been able to become an early morning runner, as I look forward to listening to Trail Society on each run. And you all are 100%, 1,000%, yes, 1,000% the reason my running buddy and I try our best to adequately fuel as we train for our first 50 mile. I can confidently say we would be woefully under fueling if it were not for all of you. So our 50-mile race coming up at the end of July is in Iowa. It's going to be hot and humid. Recently listened to your episode about heat training and racing, and unless I missed it, your advice for Midwest people running in the humidity was, I quote, "We're sorry and good luck," end quote. I laughed out loud while listening, but now I'm getting nervous as the race is approaching. What advice do you have to keep cool during hot and humid races? Thanks so much, and I hope you know what you're doing matters. You are making a difference. Thank you.
Millennial heart emoji.
Heart emoji. I missed that part. I know we do have an episode out there. It's like the sweaty season episode. But I guess we can kind of maybe touch on. I mean, I would say even if it's hot and humid, still like evaporative cooling isn't as effective, but it still does work.
It's still helpful, just not as helpful as it would be in a dry environment, which sucks. So you might want to utilize more wicking materials versus like a cotton that you can get away with when it's dry out. But yeah, there are other cooling strategies too, right? Like pre-race heat acclimation is still very important because you'll just be better equipped from it, even if it's humid.
What would that look like?
I mean, still the sauna like training that we've talked about, right? So we're talking, finding a lower week, a couple weeks out from the race, doing that 7 to 10 day block, and then kind of extending it forward. There's iterations of that.
What if their run's already in the heat and humid environment, like in Iowa? Because that's
totally. Yeah. Well, here's the thing. Maybe they're early morning runners and they're avoiding the heat of the day. Totally fine. I want you to keep your quality of your sessions high, right? So it's like, I think mentally getting out in the heat of the day can be good, but I wouldn't put every single session in there because it's much harder than the session is supposed to be, essentially. So it's like timing some of that so you feel that confidence. But if you're mostly running early in the morning to avoid high heat and high humidity indexes, utilizing post-run saunas can be a way to continue to get that heat acclimation in. And then anything that's going to make you feel cool during the race, having ice in your water bottles, putting ice on you. So generally we're using ice on us as evaporative cooling, but that cooling sensation of the ice is still going to be really helpful, even if you're not losing as much of the water to the air around you, would be kind of my big recommendations.
If anyone's been watching the Tour de France, if you've been seeing like they basically have little ice fests that they're going to do like before the race starts. It's like, keeping your body cool before you even, start the race, but you can do that during the race, obviously, because it's an ultra and you're gonna be out there a long time.
Yeah, I wouldn't wear an ice vest because they become insulative at a certain point. But what you can do is,
no, not the whole thing, but I'm saying at the aid station.
Yeah, or I mean, they're expensive. So if you take a towel and you put it in your cooler,
make your own ice vest.
Your 5 minutes, get that cold, wet towel on you, and that's gonna help. That's gonna be your ice vest in aid station, for example.
Oh yeah.
And then honestly, you're going to have to modify your effort a little bit potentially. Like peak performance is not generally July in Iowa, I would say. We know that from road marathoning as well, that like when temperatures creep up, road marathon times go way down. And so it's just like taking care of yourself early becomes even more important, I think, in that environment.
Mm-hmm.
Keely, anything you want to add to that?
No, I think that's pretty much it.
I'm sorry that we laughed and said good luck.
But
I know.
During the 50
that
mile,
sounds like a jerk.
during the 50 mile,
feeling.
just like cool off as much as you can. Again, I think my advice is more around just like race strategy, in the sense that what we saw at Western States was that even Jim Walmsley sits down, cools off, changes his shirt, puts on a nice shirt. Like at your 50 mile and end of July is going to be hot and humid. Just cool off as many times as you can. The traditional cooling might not be as effective in humid environments, but it will still help you. So just cool off, wear ice bandanas, wear your arm sleeves with ice cubes in them, have everyone douse you in water, ice water, all of the things. And don't worry about taking extra time, because if you take an extra couple minutes at every aid, but it allows you to avoid a really catastrophic bonk later, then you save a lot of time.
Agreed. I think most of us practice what we preach in this regard. So continue those trends. Last one, I'll finish us up here, was a Trail Society crew connections, all of our faves. So this listener wrote in and said, I was traveling to Italy to celebrate my 3-year wedding anniversary, where we decided to hike through the Dolomites. Arriving June 30th, we walked through Cortina, and I was so sad we had just missed Lavaredo. On our way back, waiting in line to board the plane, we were standing near this guy wearing a North Face outfit and with a sick mohawk. So I asked him if it was for a specific race or sponsorship. He began explaining he was there for the race and he is one of the commentators for UTMB. I geeked and I asked if he knew Corinne. Come to find out it was Keith Burns, and I began fangirling about all of his knowledge and stats and predictions for UTMB. Airport connections and Trail Society fans. My husband, who's not a trail runner or a runner, then had to listen to me explain all about UTMB, Corinne, and the pod for most of our 9-hour flight home. Thanks for creating an outlet of connection. And Keith actually also texted me about this interaction. So this is like coming full circle. I'm really happy that people are meeting each other out there and connecting through us. We had Carolina Rubio Macri, who's on the podcast, came into an aid station at Western States, and someone said, "You're Carolina. I heard you on the Trail Society podcast. Like, so happy to have you at this aid station." So continue connecting with folks out there on the trail. I think we have more similarities than differences. We can support each other in a multitude of ways without even knowing it. And I guess keep sliding into our DMs. Give us 5 stars or 6 or whatever you're allowed to do. Share it with a friend. Bring us on your next long run. And until next time, we'll see you out on the trails.